One of the biggest mistakes people make when talking about inflation is assuming it's temporary. They think it's a phase, a cycle, something that will cool off and go back to normal. But inflation is not an accident. It is a feature of the system. Once a country operates on fiat currency, inflation becomes inevitable over long periods of time. The only question is how fast and how visible it becomes. And here's the key insight that almost nobody understands. Inflation does not hurt everyone equally. It punishes savers. It punishes wage earners. It punishes people who rely solely on income. And it rewards asset owners. It rewards borrowers. It rewards people who understand leverage. That's why the middle class feels like it's slipping backwards, while the wealthy continue to expand their balance sheets. Why wages can't keep up. Most people believe that if they just work hard, get raises, and move up in their careers, everything will eventually balance out. But wages are reactive. Inflation is proactive. Prices rise first. Wages follow later, if they follow at all. When inflation hits, companies raise prices immediately. When workers ask for raises, they're told to wait. Even when wages do increase, they rarely outpace inflation consistently. That means every year, without realizing it, your labor buys less. You're not standing still. You're moving backward, slowly. The psychological trap of more money. Here's where the system really traps people. As income rises, lifestyle expands. Better apartment, nicer car, more subscriptions, more obligations. So even if someone technically earns more, their margin doesn't increase. In many cases, it shrinks. This is why people making six figures still feel broke. They're earning more depreciating currency and spending it on liabilities that require even more currency to maintain. That's not progress. That's a treadmill. Why the old advice was logical then. The advice to work hard, save money, and pay off your house wasn't stupid. It made sense in a different era. When money was stable, when pensions existed, when housing costs were reasonable relative to income, when debt carried different risk dynamics. Back then, saving preserved value. Today, saving often destroys it. The environment changed. The advice didn't. How fiat money quietly changes behavior. When money loses value over time, people behave differently, even if they don't realize why. They rush purchases. They fear holding cash. They stretch themselves thin to lock in prices. This creates a feedback loop. People feel pressure. Pressure leads to bad decisions. Bad decisions increase dependence on debt. And debt, when misunderstood, becomes a weapon against the middle class. Why the wealthy love inflation and never say it out loud. Inflation is devastating if you don't own assets. But if you do, it can be incredibly powerful. Here's why. If you own an asset that produces income and its value rises with inflation, then your income increases that. Your asset appreciates that. Your debt becomes cheaper in real terms. Meanwhile, the currency used to repay that debt is worth less. This is why people who understand inflation don't panic during inflationary periods. They reposition. The middle class pays the price twice. The middle class gets hit from both sides. On one side, their cash loses value. On the other side, their costs increase. Housing, food, insurance, energy, education. Meanwhile, taxes quietly rise, not always through higher rates, but through brackets, fees, and hidden costs. The result? Less flexibility, more stress, fewer options. Why financial stress feels permanent. One of the most damaging effects of this system isn't financial, it's psychological. When people feel constantly behind, they stop thinking long-term. They focus on survival. Short-term thinking leads to high-interest debt, bad investments, emotional decisions, fear-based behavior. And fear is expensive. The wealth gap is not an accident. The widening gap between asset owners and non-owners is not random. It is the natural outcome of an inflationary system. Those who own assets benefit from inflation. Those who rely on income fund it. That's why understanding assets versus liabilities is not optional anymore. It's survival. Why playing it safe is now risky. For decades, people were told to avoid risk. Don't borrow. Don't invest. Don't speculate. But here's the uncomfortable truth. In an inflationary environment, doing nothing is risky. Holding cash is risky. Avoiding assets is risky. Staying uneducated is risky. The risk just doesn't feel dramatic until years later. The slow erosion problem. Inflation doesn't usually collapse people overnight. It erodes them gradually. They dip into savings. They postpone goals. They delay freedom. And one day they wake up realizing time is gone and options are limited. That's the real cost. Why this knowledge creates urgency, not panic. Understanding this isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. Once you see the system clearly, you stop blaming yourself and start adapting. You stop chasing comfort. You stop following outdated advice. You start building strategically. The shift that changes everything. The moment you stop asking, how do I save more money? And start asking, how do I own more assets? Everything changes. That's the pivot point. That's where the wealthy separate themselves quietly from everyone else. Consumption, lifestyle inflation, and why most people never get ahead. One of the most destructive forces working against the middle class has nothing to do with politics, central banks, or inflation rates. It has to do with consumption. Not reckless spending, not stupidity, not irresponsibility, but normal, socially accepted consumption. The kind that everyone around you is doing. The kind that feels justified. The kind that looks like progress. This is where most people lose the wealth game before they even realize they're playing it. Because consumption doesn't feel dangerous. It feels rewarding. The illusion of progress. One of the biggest lies modern society tells people is that upgrading your lifestyle means you're moving forward. Bigger apartment, better neighborhood, newer car, more conveniences, more comfort. Each one feels like success. But very few people stop to ask the only question that actually matters. Does this upgrade increase my freedom or reduce it? Most upgrades reduce freedom. They increase fixed expenses. They increase dependency on income. They increase vulnerability to shocks. And yet, they're celebrated. Why consumption is so powerful. Consumption is emotional. It provides instant gratification in a world where patience is increasingly rare. It also provides identity. People don't just buy things. They buy signals. Signals of success. Signals of stability. Signals of belonging. And the middle class is especially vulnerable to this because it sits at the intersection of aspiration and insecurity. People want to feel like they're doing well. They want proof. They want validation. Consumption provides that faster than assets ever will. The timing mismatch that ruins lives. Assets work slowly. Consumption works immediately. That timing mismatch is fatal. An asset might take years to show visible results. Consumption shows results instantly. You drive the car today. You live in the house today. You enjoy the vacation today. But the cost shows up later, quietly, monthly, relentlessly. Lifestyle inflation is the silent killer. Lifestyle inflation is not when you spend wildly. It's when your expenses quietly rise alongside your income. You don't feel reckless. You feel reasonable. After all, you can afford it. But affordability is not the same as sustainability. And it's definitely not the same as wealth. When your income goes up and your expenses follow it, you've gained nothing. You're just carrying heavier luggage. Why high earners are often broke. Some of the most financially stressed people earn the most money. That seems counterintuitive until you understand lifestyle inflation. High income creates a false sense of security. It encourages commitments, larger mortgages, more expensive cars, private schools, expensive habits. Each commitment locks in future income requirements. So instead of income creating freedom, it creates pressure. The higher you climb, the further you fall if something goes wrong. The difference between being rich and looking rich. This distinction changes everything. Looking rich requires spending. Being rich requires restraint. Looking rich impresses strangers. Being rich buys freedom. Most people choose looking rich because it's visible. Wealth is invisible. No one applauds a paid-off rental property. No one compliments disciplined cash flow. No one notices long-term strategy. But everyone notices a new car. Why society rewards the wrong behavior. Modern culture celebrates consumption. Advertising is built on it. Social media amplifies it. Peer pressure normalizes it. Very few people celebrate restraint. Very few people admire patience. Very few people encourage delayed gratification. Because restraint doesn't sell products. Consumption does. The middle class trap. The middle class is uniquely trapped because it earns enough to consume, but not enough to absorb mistakes easily. The poor often have no choice but to focus on survival. The wealthy can afford inefficiency. The middle class sits in between. Enough income to qualify for debt. Enough stability to be targeted by lenders. Enough pressure to keep appearances. This is where consumption becomes dangerous. Debt as a lifestyle subsidy. Debt allows people to consume beyond their actual purchasing power. It smooths the pain. It delays consequences. It makes bad decisions feel manageable until they're not. Debt doesn't just finance assets. It finances lifestyles. And when lifestyles are financed, freedom disappears. Why paying off debt alone doesn't fix the problem. Many people realize debt is a problem and make paying it off their sole goal. That's better than ignoring it, but it's not enough. If you don't change the behavior that created the debt, it will return. And if you eliminate debt without building assets, you're still vulnerable. Debt elimination without asset acquisition is incomplete. Consumption feels logical in an inflationary world. Here's the paradox. Inflation encourages spending. People rush to buy before prices rise further. They fear holding cash. They justify purchases as locking in value. But buying liabilities to escape inflation is like jumping into deeper water to avoid rain. It doesn't solve the problem. It compounds it. Why houses become emotional traps? Housing deserves special attention because it sits at the center of middle-class identity. Homeownership is sold as security, but not all homes are assets. A primary residence often behaves like a liability. Mortgage, maintenance, taxes, insurance, upgrades. It consumes cash flow. And yet, people stretch themselves to buy bigger homes because it feels like progress. This is one of the most emotionally charged decisions people make, and emotion is expensive. The cost of normal. Most people aren't trying to be extravagant. They're trying to be normal, but normal has been redefined upward. Bigger houses than previous generations. More cars per household. More services outsourced. More recurring expenses. Normal today is expensive, and expensive normality leaves little room for error. Why most people never catch up. When income increases, consumption increases. When consumption increases, fixed costs increase. When fixed costs increase, flexibility disappears. When flexibility disappears, fear increases. And fear locks people into survival mode. Survival mode is incompatible with long-term wealth building. The emotional resistance to assets. Assets require patience. They require learning. They require discomfort. They often don't look impressive early on. That makes them emotionally unattractive. Consumption feels good now. Assets feel good later. Most people choose now. Why this isn't about deprivation. This isn't about never enjoying life. It's about sequencing. The wealthy delay consumption until assets pay for it. The middle class consumes first and hopes income catches up. One approach compounds, the other decays. The moment people wake up, for many people, the realization comes late. A job loss, a health issue, a market downturn, a family emergency. Suddenly, the lifestyle feels fragile. That's when people realize how little margin they had. Margin is wealth, rewriting the definition of success. The most important shift is redefining success. Success is not what you own. Success is what you can walk away from. A job, a city, a bad deal, a toxic environment. Assets buy options. Consumption removes them. Why this shift feels lonely. When you stop consuming like everyone else, you stand out. People question you. They project insecurity. They assume something is wrong. This is why most people don't change. Belonging feels safer than freedom, until it isn't. The foundation for everything that comes next. Understanding consumption versus asset acquisition is not optional. It's foundational. If you don't control consumption, nothing else matters. No strategy works. No investment saves you. No income level protects you. This is the gatekeeper lesson. Habits, discipline, and the invisible forces that decide who builds wealth. One of the biggest misunderstandings about wealth is that it's driven primarily by intelligence. People assume that rich people are smarter, more talented, better educated. That belief is comforting because it gives everyone an excuse, but it's also false. Wealth is far more influenced by habits than intelligence, and habits are formed quietly, repeatedly, and often unconsciously. That's why two people with identical incomes can end up in completely different financial positions over time, not because one is smarter, but because one developed habits that compound. How financial habits are really formed. Most people don't consciously decide how they handle money. They absorb it. From parents, from peers, from culture, from advertising. If you grew up seeing money used for comfort, relief, or validation, that becomes your default. If you grew up seeing money used for stability and long-term planning, that becomes yours. Neither feels like a choice. Both feel normal. This is why changing financial behavior feels so uncomfortable. You're not just changing actions. You're challenging identity. Why discipline is more important than motivation. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline stays. Wealth doesn't come from bursts of effort. It comes from boring, repetitive decisions made consistently over time. Choosing not to upgrade when income rises. Choosing to invest before spending. Choosing to delay gratification when everyone else indulges. These decisions don't feel heroic. They feel restrictive, which is exactly why most people don't make them. The myth of, "I'll start later." One of the most dangerous phrases in personal finance is, "I'll start later." Later when income is higher. Later when things are stable. Later when life calms down. Later rarely comes, because habits scale with income. If you don't control consumption at a low income, you won't control it at a higher one. You'll just consume at a more expensive level. Why small leaks sink big ships? People tend to focus on big financial decisions. Buying a house, choosing a career, making an investment. But wealth is usually lost through small, repeated leaks. Subscriptions, convenience spending, impulse purchases, lifestyle creep. Individually, they feel harmless. Collectively, they drain margin. Margin is what allows opportunity. Without margin, even good opportunities become impossible. The role of delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the single most reliable predictor of long-term wealth. Not income, not education, not background. The ability to say not yet is more powerful than the ability to say yes. But delayed gratification is deeply countercultural. Everything around us pushes immediacy. Buy now, pay later, upgrade instantly. Resisting that current requires intentional structure. Why willpower is not enough. Most people try to fix money problems with willpower. They promise to budget harder. They promise to stop spending. They promise to be better. That rarely works. Willpower is finite. Systems are durable. The wealthy don't rely on willpower. They build systems that make good behavior automatic and bad behavior inconvenient. Environment shapes behavior more than desire. If you're surrounded by consumption, you'll consume. If your peers upgrade constantly, pressure builds. If your environment normalizes debt, you'll accept it. This is why changing environments is often more effective than changing intentions. Different conversations, different influences, different expectations. This doesn't mean abandoning relationships. It means being conscious of inputs. Why saying no feels like failure. In consumer culture, restraint is framed as lack. If you don't upgrade, people assume you can't. If you don't spend, people assume you're struggling. This creates psychological pressure. People would rather appear successful than actually be secure. This is one of the most expensive trade-offs people make. The loneliness of long-term thinking. Long-term thinkers often feel isolated. They make decisions others don't understand. They delay pleasures others enjoy. They prioritize invisibles over visibles. This loneliness causes many people to abandon the path early. They don't fail financially. They quit emotionally. Why comfort is the enemy of change? Comfort creates inertia. If your lifestyle is good enough, urgency disappears. Not painful enough to change. Not secure enough to relax. This middle zone traps people for decades. True change often requires discomfort, either chosen intentionally or forced by crisis. The first option is far cheaper. Breaking the consumption identity. To escape consumption, you have to change what money means to you. If money means pleasure, you'll spend it. If money means safety, you'll hoard it. If money means freedom, you'll invest it. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens through repetition, through small wins, through seeing progress compound. Why progress feels slow at first. Early asset building feels unrewarding. The numbers are small. The impact is invisible. The effort feels disproportionate. This is where most people stop. They confuse slow beginnings with failure, but compounding always looks unimpressive at first. Then, it becomes unstoppable. The moment control returns. At some point, something changes. Expenses stabilize. Assets grow. Options expand. This moment doesn't come from income. It comes from alignment. When spending, investing, and goals move in the same direction, that's when momentum replaces struggle. Unwinding lifestyle. Inflation without pain. Most people think reducing lifestyle means suffering. It doesn't have to. The key is gradual reallocation, not deprivation. Redirecting upgrades into assets. Redirecting raises into investments. If you've made it this far, understand something important. Most people never will. Not because they aren't capable, but because most people would rather stay comfortable than confront the truth. Everything you've heard in this video isn't about getting rich quick. It's about seeing the system clearly. It's about understanding why the old rules no longer work. And it's about realizing that building wealth today requires thinking differently, acting differently, and staying disciplined longer than most people are willing to. This isn't a path for people looking for shortcuts. It's a path for people who want freedom. Freedom from financial stress. Freedom from living paycheck to paycheck. Freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you work with, and where you live. None of this happens overnight. It takes years of consistent decisions. It takes patience when results aren't visible yet. And it takes the courage to stop following advice that no longer applies to the world we live in today. If this message challenged the way you think about money, that's a good thing. Growth always starts with discomfort. If you found value in this, do two simple things. First, like this video. It helps more people see information that can genuinely change their lives. Second, subscribe to the channel. This channel exists to teach what schools don't, what most media avoids, and what the wealthy quietly practice every day. And if you're ready to go deeper, click the next video. There's one strategy the wealthy use that most people never see, and once you understand it, you'll never look at money the same way again. Thank you for watching.